There you go. All right. So first things first, for those that are new this week, because we've got a bunch of new people registered this week. I just wanted to say hello. My name is Alan. I'm the head of business performance for RadTech. My background, very, very quickly, I've built a couple of tech companies in the past, spent about 15 years either delivering stuff virtually. So one was an online learning platform. One was a business system for independent veterinary practices where we had what we called virtual practice managers delivering coaching and support. I've ran virtual teams. I was in Australia for 12 years. But in between those two businesses, I managed to burn out quite badly. And so a lot of the sort of the science that I've taught and learned over the last 12 plus years now started at that point where I kind of was struggling with that question. I think all of us struggle with how do you maintain a level of performance, but don't kill yourself at the same time. So that's what this is all about. My journey took me from understanding what makes individuals thrive, which is what I dealt with last week, and the empowers model, to this week, which is more about what makes teams thrive, which is really important. So I'm super excited to share this neuroscience. I think one of the bits of feedback I got last week was, I walked away with two things. Personally, if you walk away with just one thing, I'd be absolutely delighted. Anything that actually makes your life easier is a win as far as I'm concerned. For those who are returning from last week, lovely to see you again. I recognize a few names in the chat box, so by all means, use the chat box to say hello, and it's great to have you back. And the final thing is a reading list. So I've been asked 2 or 3 times by people, Al, you mentioned so many books last week, will you send us a reading list? The answer is yes, I will. I am compiling that. Even if you've written down 2 or 3 books from last week, I think that'll keep you going for the next week or so. And I will get a reading list out to you. I just don't want to bombard you with lots and lots and lots of stuff. We'll just keep it simple to start with. The only final thing from me is a bit of an ask, really, and that is, yeah, Phil, I'll definitely do that, mate. I'll definitely get that out. And thanks for that, Luke. You're right. There's lots of sources on YouTube. Some of my little videos are on the RadTech YouTube channel about the impact of positive emotion on team cohesion and stuff like that. So thanks for that reminder, Luke. So the last one was a little ask from me, and that is please tell colleagues. The reason why I do this stuff is these challenging times, right? But this is about putting good stuff out into the world. And if it just helps everyone move the dial one notch, then we all win. My big passion of RadTech generally is that we make positive change, but we don't just talk about tools and processes. The people side is as important, and we wrap a lot of science around that. So that's enough from me. Let's crack on. Keep the comments coming in the chat box. That would be great. So last week I did explain that organizations are not hierarchies. So one of the big messages we tend to sort of share with chief executives and CTOs and the C-suite generally is that our mental model that organizations are these hierarchies and they're mechanistic, that I pull this lever and things start happening immediately, isn't true. Peter Senge, one of the grandfathers of systems theory, said that organizations are human enacted systems of interdependence. And that's a visual representation of what's known as a complex dynamic system. That's what organizations are. These red and green dots, blue dots, imagine they're teams. And each team has its own relationships internally, but also it has relationships around it. Business unit you support, or the marketing team you talk to, or whatever. And that call out there, the red and green dots, is kind of a sort of a zoomed in view of what that looks like. That's pretty much every human system, by the way. That's not just organizations. They all look like that. And they're complex and they're adaptive, and they change and ebb and flow. And so they're organic in nature, they're not mechanistic. And that was part of this great shift. That we're moving from this understanding that organizations are not these big sort of cumbersome machines, they're adaptive. And that's the big shift, it's part of actually the big shift that's occurring, the understanding of what organizations truly are. And last week I dealt with really the bottom right-hand corner of this infographic that I created some time ago. We are talking about this bottom section, which is individuals and teams. And as we go up, I'm going to talk more about context, so that some of these messages that I'm sharing with you, I'm hoping you'll put under your own arm and you'll take it to the senior leaders in your organization. Because what will happen at the end of this COVID-19 process that we're all in, which is challenging, is that most companies will look at this and say, how did we do? What did we do well? What could we have done better? Were we adaptable? Were we flexible? Did we do the right thing by our customers? Did we do the right thing by our people? Now, this model actually talks to all of that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this piece on the right-hand side, because I deliberately didn't go into much detail when we were last together. And what you'll see is that there's a number 70% on one side and 30% on the other. What we are starting to understand from neuroscience is approximately about 70% of our brain is geared towards survival and 30% towards a reward orientation. Why is that? Well, because our ancestors, their lives were not guaranteed like ours are to a degree. It was much more precarious living in the days of a hunter-gatherer. And it's normal and natural to end up with a brain that is very good at being on the alert, very good at sensing what's happening in its environment, because it was important for survival. The problem is, though, in an organizational setting, the kind of settings that we're in, when that's getting triggered most of the time, which you see in high stress environments, low trust environments, that fear then drives a lot of the behavior. And then you'll start seeing the kind of symptoms of what I call a kind of cortisol culture. Cortisol is one of the chemicals produced by a fight or flight response in the amygdala. Fear, so you start getting the symptoms, which is silo mentality, competing for resources, conscious displays of anger, a lack of innovation, fear of failure, blah, 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 blah. For many of us in this workshop, we have immersed ourselves in the world of business agility or lean or innovation or some new mechanism of doing work. And that certainly talks to more about the right-hand side, the reward orientation of an organization. Last week I talked about positive emotion, the broaden and build concept of Barbara Fredrickson, the impact of oxytocin, which is produced by positive emotion. And then what are the symptoms of that? There's more collaboration. There's more innovation because we see more. We connect the dots better. There's more creativity, less stress and dysfunction, less displays of anger, and we embrace failure as an opportunity to learn. So Barbara always talks about an upward spiral, and on the left-hand side there's a downward spiral. So I just wanted to call that piece out, because what we're trying to do, whichever organization you're in, what you're really, really trying to do when you strip back all of the tools and processes, whether it's agile or lean or safe or less or whatever, the truth is what you're trying to do at a deeper level is move to a reward orientation, the positive side of the brain rather than the negative. You're trying to create mechanisms and tools and processes to increase that. I hope that makes sense. It's a really simple story. Very difficult to do, particularly when the culture of the organization you're in and has been immersed in this survival orientation, the sort of fairly traditional top-down hierarchical approach to running organizations. It's challenging. It's really challenging, because those habits of behavior that are entrenched take time to undo. That's why we follow a more scientific process of change rather than Big Bang, because it doesn't work. Big Bang does not work. You have to use science to understand how you change behaviors at scale. What I wanted to do today, though, was focus on the team bit, which is down here. That's David Rock's model: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail. Now, in the chat box, any observations? Does anything sort of ring true or not ring true? Because I'm pretty open. This is people science. 80% is the ideal. So 100% of things don't work for 100% of people 100% of the time. Anything above 80% is great. So any observations would be brilliant as we go on. Now, there's normally about a 20 or 30-second lag as people are typing, but I'm hoping this makes sense. This is this unseen stuff that I'm trying to call out. There are, I think it's week 4, I'm going to talk about how a lot of this science links to things like business agility in its broadest sense. But, you know, for now, it's enough to know that this stuff is going on underneath the surface. And any of us who've tried to sort of change cultures and stuff like that will have seen some of these symptoms. Okay, so I will, beautiful. Okay, so the SCARF model appears similar to the human Givens approach, a list of basic human needs. So the answer is they should be similar. So it's a great point, Phil. All of these should overlap in some way. What makes individuals thrive clearly impacts what makes us thrive at a team level. And then when I look at context, which is next week, I'm going to try and show you how that sort of folds up into context. What should our organizations feel like when we're working in them? Brilliant. Okay, so Joe Griffin and Ivan Tyrrell. So one of the beautiful things about doing this kind of stuff is that I learn as I go too. So I haven't read Joe Griffin's stuff, so I will definitely have a look at that, Phil. So thanks a million for sending that through. Okay, beautiful. Now, what I want you to do, just very quickly, as we crack on, is think about one painful life event. It should immediately spring to mind. Think about one painful life event. Okay? By all means, if you want, scribble it down. Okay, beautiful. The next, think about one event that inspired a sense of awe. So in your life thus far, one event that inspired a sense of awe. Just take 2 seconds. Thanks for sending that link through as well, Phil. I get a copy of the chat at the end of this workshop, so I'll go and have a wee look. It's brilliant. Okay, so I'm not going to ask about the pain because that's personal, but what I will do is share 2 that came up for me when I did this. So the first thing is, when I was 16 years old, I broke my neck and ended up flat on my back in traction for 6 weeks. But when I wrote this down, it was the first thing that pinged into my head was the night where I nearly died. I remember that very clearly. But the second thing, very, very swiftly after that, a painful life event, was the death of my father, because it happened so suddenly. He was perfectly well 1 second, and then within 5 minutes, he started going downhill. He was making his toast in the morning. 5 minutes later, he couldn't move his left hand. By the time the ambulance arrived, which was only 4 or 5 minutes after that, he'd lost the feeling in his left arm. And then within an hour to 90 minutes, the doctors were telling my mum he wasn't coming back. It was a massive stroke. So they were painful life events. And then the event that inspired a sense of awe. There have been many times in my life where I've really experienced awe. But one of them was I accidentally lost my moped keys overboard on a ship off the coast of Turkey. We were just anchored off a beach in Turkey, and my moped keys were in my towel. I flicked my towel, and off they went overboard. So I grabbed a scuba mask, jumped into the sea, and then swam to the bottom, not realizing it was about 30 feet down. It looked about 10 feet because it was so crystal clear. I got to the bottom and grabbed my keys. And as I turned, I looked up, and all I could see was this fish, this extraordinary blue, and the whole of the bottom of the boat. It was one of the most profound, kind of peaceful, awe-inspiring moments. Lasted for a good 3 seconds before I realized I was running out of air and I had to swim back to the surface. But they're embedded deeply in me. And the point of the story links to everything I'm going to talk about for the rest of this afternoon. So I'd be really keen to hear if anyone's had one of those moments of awe, a sense of awe. And lob it in the chat box, even if it's just a couple of sentences, you know, sitting on top of the volcano watching the sunrise, blah, blah, blah. Just from John, lack of threat. They hire us to make change, and they threaten when they don't embrace what they hear. So that's, gosh, that's a whole conversation by itself, John. So while everybody's scribbling their moments of awe, let me just talk about that a little bit. I think what we're all pointing at there is the natural tendency for people to defend sometimes the indefensible. I think the hard thing that we all deal with is that when human beings perceive things in a certain way and you bring a different worldview to them, that can threaten at quite a deep and unconscious level. And so often, you know, if all of your professional career kicking people's backsides has got you to where you've got to then hear somebody say, well, actually, that's quite toxic and it does a lot of damage, is very, very threatening. So that is certainly a challenge, and it is a symptom of that kind of cortisol environment. Now you've got a mental model. Now you know it's part of a cortisol environment. It means that you've got a broader set of tools to bring to that table, and also some understanding, some compassion. It's not because people are bad, it's just because they're human. Playing in a band in a Royal Tournament, oh blimey, at Earl's Court, all I could see was a light and rig, could not see the crowd. So John, you're a man after my own heart. I was a drummer for many years in the band, and I remember some amazing, we played on the back of a Royal Navy frigate. I couldn't see anything apart from the lights either, and that's probably not a bad thing, rather than a bunch of drunken sailors. But I think that's fantastic. That's wonderful. So the consultant surgeon and his team that did a quadruple bypass on Phil's dad, and 5 other patients in one day, still in awe of that team. That's amazing. That's amazing. Right. What the heck am I talking about? So what I wanted to talk about is social cognitive neuroscience. Why am I asking about, you know, a painful life event and very deliberate words? And this is Matthew Lieberman's book, Social. Please get it. I highly recommend it. So there are 3 main lessons from this book, if you're too busy to read it. Number 1, every one of us has what Matthew calls a Trojan horse in the brain. And the Trojan War was the Greeks had the city of Troy surrounded for 10 years. It was a 10-year siege. And eventually the Greeks kind of gave up, thought this is too hard. And they left the Trojans present, which was a massive wooden horse. The Greeks sailed away, and the Trojans were, hooray, and they pulled this horse into the citadel. And overnight, they went to sleep after a big party. But inside this wooden horse were a whole bunch of Greek soldiers who climbed out of the inside of the horse, opened the gates, and the story ends there. You know, the Trojans lost the war. Now, in neuroscientific world, the Trojan horse is there is a part of our brain that unconsciously takes on the beliefs and the behaviors of others, right? It's really important. So there's a part of our brain that takes on the unconscious beliefs and behaviors of others. Now, if anyone has teenage kids, this will kind of be of interest to you. So in the adult brain, we do have a little bit of a filter mechanism at the front of that Trojan horse, a sort of a BS monitor. And that helps us sort of, weed out the nonsense from the good stuff. But still, we do still bring stuff on unconsciously. Now, teenagers do not have that filter. That's why they can go from perfectly great kids to complete muppets in a sort of blink of an eye, because they take on the beliefs and the behaviors of their mates, but they think they're their own and they think they're absolutely true. So I just thought I would share that with you. Okay, so we've got a Trojan horse part to our brain. Now, secondly, the default network. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. You should be able to see me. And I'm going to show you this default network because this is also very important. And hello to everyone who's still joining us. So this is the default network in glorious Technicolor. I'll just turn that around slightly. So we've got general cognition at the top, social cognition at the bottom. And what does that mean? Well, what they found, what Matthew and his colleagues have found, is that when we're focused on a task of some sort, then our general cognition is switched on, our social cognition is dimmed. Okay, it's not quite switched off, it's sort of dimmed. But conversely, when we're not focused on a task, what happens is our social cognition switches on, this sort of default network, a default network. What Matthew really is talking about is this is part of the brain. It's a bit like software running in the back of all of our computers suddenly switches on, which is kind of, baffling to a degree. And Matthew is intrigued by this. Why does this default network switch on? And I've got to come to the answer. So this happens for all of us, where we're not focused on a sort of a general cognitive task. The social default network turns on. The third thing, loss. I asked earlier about a memory that is painful. Painful was the word I used. So Matthew did an experiment using a tool called Cyberball, which is a game, a virtual game. So I'm playing with two other people, but I'm sitting in a fMRI scanner and I'm virtually passing a ball to two other people. And we were just randomly passing the ball. Now, the people in the fMRI scanner are told that the experiment was to do with hand-eye coordination or coordination on a kind of simulation. And within about 3 or 4 minutes of playing this game, suddenly, these two people aren't passing the ball to me anymore. They're passing just to each other. I've been cut out of the game. And a part of the brain lights up at that point. And what they found was the part of the brain that lit up was the same part of the brain that feels pain. So, same part of the brain that lights up when we feel pain. I need to be very clear with my language. This was a really, really big deal when this was discovered. And what they did is they brought the people out of the fMRI scanner and said, look, you weren't really cut out of the game by two strangers. It's just a program. It's just a piece of software, and it randomly cuts you out of the game. And you went, okay, now I understand. I don't feel so bad. And they put the person back in the fMRI scanner. And even though they knew it was just a piece of software running, when they got cut out of the game, the pain network fired up again, even though they knew it was just a simulation and it was just a random piece of software. So this is really important. This sense of social loss triggered the pain sender. Equally, when we're included in something, it triggers the reward sender. Now, what's the point of all of that? The main point I'm trying to make is that when Maslow created this hierarchy of need, where he said our physiological needs, food and water, our needs for safety and shelter, and then love and belonging, that was the hierarchy. On a sort of normal, common sense perspective, yes, that's correct. But what we find in from neuroscience is that it's not accurate. And what we mean by that is our social connection, that love belonging piece, is actually at the bottom of the pyramid. It is the primary need. It's a survival need, because as infants, we are dependent on a social connection for our survival. What these experiments, these three pieces, show us is that the brain is geared for social connection because it is so profoundly important to survival. Okay, so here's the thing. The brain treats many social threats and rewards with the same intensity as physical threats and rewards. Okay, that's the big piece from this section. So our capacity to make decisions, solve problems, collaborate with others is generally reduced by the threat response and increased by the reward response. So everybody's still with me? Is this making sense? Which brings us to David's scarf model. Okay, so the reason why the red, forgive me, I'm just checking. Okay, we're all good, great. So the reason why the red arrow is bigger than the green goes back to that 70%, 30% I talked about earlier, that we have a natural tendency towards the away from the threat response, and it's lesser than our sort of reward response. So if we've got a virtual team, we have to work quite hard to keep that level of engagement with our team, to keep them more towards the positive. And the problem with virtual working at our firm is the opportunity for some miscommunication, misinterpretation increases. All of us have experienced that email that said, have you got time for a coffee? And we've gone completely ballistic and said, what do you mean have I got time for it? I'm so stressed, you know, blah, blah. Don't you understand? And the person's like, well, seriously, only asking if you had time for a coffee, right? So that does happen. And that's why when you're running virtual team particularly, you know, being more aware of this stuff is profoundly important. So I want you to think about a great team that you've worked in. And if you could just quickly throw in one word to describe what were some of the attributes of that great team, that would be awesome. All right, cool. Trust, brilliant. Veronica. Now, I've got a few people on, so just throw them in. Yeah, have fun, friendly, yeah. Beautiful. So it's interesting that when I've done this exercise, selfless, thanks Rod, when I've done this exercise before, most of the attributes that come up are not about outcomes, although they're important. You know, I'm a person who's built organizations and you know, I'm focused on the outcome. Camaraderie, beautiful. So they're fantastic descriptions. Consistent banter and happiness, the social glue, as it were. So you're all bang on, you all get 10 points and 3 bags of cheesy Wotsits and go straight to the top of the class. So what I'm going to share with you are some of this invisible stuff that we all experience and all know to be key to high performance, but we really have a framework for it. Now, I think David's model is a really good model. It's been around since about 2009, so it's had a certain amount of rigor applied to it, and it still stands up pretty well. So let's get into it very quickly. And then I'm going to try and finish in the next 15 minutes, open to questions and answers. And then, you know, we're all happy. So the first one is status, our relative importance to others. We know our place in the pecking order. We seek status and prestige. Now, the reason I put Trump Tower there is a lot of people strive to enhance their status. And I think Donald, God bless him, is one of those people, you know, where there's this desperate need to show how wonderful he is to the world. And interestingly, everyone has their own baggage. So every single human being in this workshop have our own baggage. And we think, this is from psychology, we tend to think that other people don't have kind of a level of baggage that we have, that somehow they seem to have their stuff together, whereas we're, you know, have insecurities, you know, worried about making mistakes, don't want to look foolish, and so on. Everyone has that. And so status is our ability to ensure that we're fine. The chances of triggering accidentally a threat response about this are quite high in a virtual world. All it takes is for you to miss somebody off the email list, or to start talking on a group Zoom call before that person's joined, and they start to feel that somehow their status in the pecking order is not confirmed. That's been my experience. I'd be interested to see if anyone's had that. So how do you overcome this? How do you ensure status is secure? Draw on people's expertise. I'm lucky, I've got some great people in my team, and I'll just say, can you please handle that? Can you upskill us in this area, and so on. What that does is helps people feel established in their sense of place in the team. Encourage mastery of new skill. That means you value that person. So what I want you to do is, can you upskill in this particular area? And then finally, additional responsibility, not as a reward, rather than putting people even more under the pump. So that's status. Just going through these and quite clip, very practical, bum, bum, bum. How can you improve it? Be aware of the stuff that's going on, is all I'm saying. And this is definitely going on. Next one is certainty. I may have talked a little bit about this last week, that we're paradoxical. So we like autonomy, but we need certainty. This is part of it. So there's a lady called Hilary Scarlett I talked to at a conference. She was a British neuroscientist, and she was talking to me about a bank. They were downsizing a part of the team, and they asked her to go in to go and talk to that team. And their performance was very average. And she said, look, it's confirmed, all of you are going. And she said their performance started to go up. Now, that doesn't sound commonsensical, but the truth of the matter is what they had then was certainty. They knew there was an end point. And so what they did is made sure that they finished on a high, so that when they went for interviews with other employers, they had a positive story to tell, even though that part of the business was being shut down. We prefer certainty. We'd rather know than not know. And at the minute, we're in a period of uncertainty, and that's why the government keeps giving these 3-week time blocks. We're working to this time block, we're working this, so that people have a sense of certainty, even in uncertain times. So being able to predict the future so we know what's coming. We dislike ambiguity and seek out familiar rhythms and patterns. How can you do that? Share plans and goals. Very practical. Share your plans and goals. What are you working on? Where are you headed? Explain what stays the same in times of change. That is particularly important right now. And one of the upsides of working in an agile way is it breaks tasks into what I call manageable chunks. And so it takes this amorphous big thing that we're doing into these little sprints, we call them in agile. And I'm not saying this because I'm kind of flogging agile. I'm just saying what it does is it gives people simple time boxes within which to work, and that gives a greater sense of certainty. If you're working that way already, great, try one of the other things. But I think that often as leaders, we have this sense of where I want to head. The more you share that with your team, the more certainty you're bringing into their world. So next, we will go to autonomy, which I said earlier is the wonderful paradoxical nature of human beings. And that is, we have a sense of control over events, and a loss of control is threatening. Now, this has been my personal experience. Burnout occurs when we have a high volume of work and low control. Conversely, when we've got a lower volume of work and higher control, then you avoid burnout. So I thought I would share that personal piece with you. How can we create autonomy, bounded autonomy, we would call it in RadTech, to be honest? Put a flag on the hill. This is where we want to get to. And then you say to the team, how will we get there? Now, that flag on the hill doesn't have to be always business or outcomes related. So Clive Woodward, the old captain of England rugby team, I was listening to him being interviewed, and he said the team were always late for team meetings, throwing bananas. So he sat down with everybody and he said, right, everybody needs to be on time for these team meetings. That is the flag on the hill. I'm going to go away for half an hour, and when I come back, you tell me how we're going to do that. And sure enough, when he went back half an hour later, they said, right, we will be here 10 minutes beforehand. Anyone not here 10 minutes beforehand has to clean the boots of everybody else in the team that week. And sure enough, everybody turned up 10 minutes beforehand. So that's bounded autonomy. Now, I am really curious because there's things that I do, like encourage risk-taking, non-judgmental feedback. What did you learn? That's how I was taught. I was taught by a guy called Brendan, who was taught by a Native American elder. And in their culture, here's how you fire an arrow, off you go. And then once you've learned some hard lessons, you come back, what did you learn, right? And that's a kind of a teaching way of creating some kind of bounded autonomy. Now, there are some great people on this workshop. So could you throw up some examples of how you create bounded autonomy? Because I think it would be really useful for other people to pick up some of your hacks and your tips. That would be really awesome. So bounded autonomy, how do you set bounded autonomy? Any tips or tricks or things that have worked for you, either running a team or going in and coaching and consulting with a team? That would be awesome. I'll just give that a few seconds. So all of us as human beings need a sense of agency in our lives. My 5-year-old girls now are, if you get a 9-year-old, are wanting to go and cycle all over the place with their 1 hour of exercise. And particularly with my 9-year-old, she tends to go off way ahead of us. And that is part of that natural desire to go and have autonomy. So some really good stuff coming up. Make it safe to fail and safe to give each other feedback. Brilliant, Phil. I appreciate you putting something up. The other thing I would add to that as well is when you show your vulnerability, you hold your hand up when you cock up, that does exactly what Phil's talking about. It makes it safe for everyone to fail, which I think what Phil is pointing to. Really, really important. So the moment you say, right, I've cocked up, I should have done it this way, this is what I've learned, then the higher the chances you've got of other people being able to put their hands up. So I'll keep going on. And by all means, just keep putting the comments in the chat box as we go. Relatedness. This is about belonging. And it's a sense of belonging and safety in the group, a willingness to collaborate with people we trust who are part of our tribe. Tribe being a very deliberate word, although it's culturally loaded. So with virtual teams particularly, this is when you have to work that little bit harder to create a sense of belonging and safety. So how would you do that? Here's a couple of potential ways of doing that. Firstly, design in conscious collaboration. John, Mary, can you work on that? Bob, Mary, Jane, can you work on that? This is important. Conscious collaboration. Secondly, get face-to-face whenever you can. Get face-to-face whenever you can. That means this. So on a Zoom call, you're face-to-face. It's the best we can do in the virtual world. That encourages a sort of sense of collaboration. Ask for help. Some research was done, where you have the prima donna in the team and the person who asks for help. And what the prima donna tends to do unconsciously is succeed at the expense of everyone else. the ask for help type of people, they will succeed because of everyone else. And when you look at those two teams over time, the ask for help team outperforms the prima donna team over and over again. When a leader asks for help, that's incredibly powerful because it unleashes much more collaboration. I'll always ask Ryan, Rod, Gus, could you handle this? Are you okay to handle this? And my guys are particularly good at saying, how can we help you? And if there's something I need, I'll ask. And if there isn't, I don't. But it's there. It's there. And that's really important. Tough conversations. Do them privately one-on-one. I said this last week, and face-to-face. So over Zoom. Never do it in front of anyone else. That destroys collaboration. Social glue, remember, is as important as an outcome as stand-ups and retrospectives. Now, it's kind of been hinted at already by this group, so that's awesome. But retrospectives, which is, if you're not in the Agile world, they're sort of regular meetings where we look at the piece of work that we've just done, what went well, what could we do better next time, and so on. We tend to focus a lot on hard outcomes. The really, really smart people also focus on the social glue in equal measure. And that banter that was mentioned earlier, it seems unimportant, but if it's good enough for the Navy SEALs, if it's good enough for teams in the NHS where there's a bit of fun and chat going on, then you've got to understand that it's part of the social glue process. So that's relatedness in the David Rock model. And then fairness. Fairness is a perception of fair exchanges between people and being treated equally. Now, I am going to try something. Just bear with me a second. You should still be able to see my screen. Please tell me. Somebody just tell me, yeah, we can still see it all right. In the chat box, that would be great. Okay, yeah, thanks, Luke. You're a star. Right, I'm just going to show you this. This is a Capuchin monkey fairness experiment. Hopefully the volume will come through, but it's okay if it doesn't. The monkey on the left, she is getting cucumber. That's all we need to know. Her friend on the right, she gets something different. She gets a grape for really just doing a simple task. So this is all about fairness.
So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. Rock to us, that's the task.
Okay, so you can just see the PowerPoint. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to share my screen again. It should hopefully, it's just some of the foibles of, okay. Thank you, Luke, you've been an absolute star. Yeah, see YouTube, great. So, monkey on the left, cucumber, monkey on the right, grape. Let's have a little look.
You will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape.
She gets a grape.
The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
She gets cucumber again. Doesn't get a grape. Not happy. Doesn't get grape. Hold on a sec. We're supposed to get grape. You made a mistake. So Frank gets a grape again.
She tests a rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
Okay. Not a happy monkey. Okay, so that's a monkey. Now I'm just going to stop sharing while I bring up the PowerPoints again. So I'm hoping you could hear that as well. Could you hear that as well? Just double checking. Yep, great. So the interesting thing about fairness is what you were looking at there. Look, could you just tell me that you can see the PowerPoints again? That would be awesome. I just always like to double check. Yeah, you're a star. You get 10 points and 3 bags of cheesy Wotsits. Luke, thanks a million. So the interesting thing about that video is, you know, that's a monkey, right? This is this Capuchin monkey, and yet they understand fairness. And why is that? And the reason why is that it's deeply ingrained in us all. Fairness is deeply ingrained. Now, my understanding is it's to do with survival. I'm getting my fair share, and that's to do with survival. So in terms of fairness, always be clear on your objectives and allocate responsibility fairly. Tip number 1. Tip number 2, create team-based rewards. This will establish a sense of fairness. I think individual rewards can be a bit of a blinking minefield. Communicate clearly and widely to all. Be as transparent as you possibly can be, particularly with a dispersed team. And so what we tend to do is me and the team have a 10 o'clock in the morning catch-up. The broader team, we have an 8:30 in the morning catch-up. That's just making sure that everybody knows where everything's at and so on. Here's the big one, the massive tip on fairness. Deal with the bad apples. One of the biggest sources of dysfunction that I see is when a leader avoids dealing with the bad apple. It happens. It happens for many reasons. The worst thing you can do is to avoid dealing with somebody that the rest of the team know is swinging the lead, taking the mickey, not pulling the weight, being dysfunctional. All right. So in terms of fairness, yes, be clear and be transparent. All of these are profoundly important. But not dealing with bad apples is incredibly destructive. So I wanted to land this in a sort of practical sense and then wrap up. So there is a thing that we have called a thriving team score. So you can, and it's all based on good science. Now you can see this is a hard copy version of it, but we've got a copy that we've been testing recently. That's a lot of science in what looks like a fairly simple structure, but it hits on a lot of the points that we've talked about over the last 2 weeks. And that thriving team score, blimey, there's a mouthful, gives you an overall score for your team. You know, so anything sort of 5.5 to 6.5 overall is you're kind of doing okay, but there's work to be done. Anything below 5.5, there's work to be done. Now, if your team fill this in and you come up in a 5.5 or below, you know that there's work to be done. When you're in the sort of 6.5, 7 bracket, you're doing pretty well, but there's always room for improvement. Anything above 8 and your team is banging along pretty well. You've got things set up pretty well. So we do have a thriving team score that's based on a lot of the stuff that I've shared over the last 2 weeks. So if people are interested in that, just let me know. We'll see what we can sort of pull together, maybe run it with your own individual team. But I wanted to land this really practically, right? So the SCARF model, I've said, here's how you can do this, 2 or 3 tips per part of the model. But also there's this other stuff that's going on. So psychological safety, feeling safe. This is from Aristotle, Project Aristotle, Google's work. But I think there's a couple of things I want to draw out from this, because I think it is important that the neuroscience is also attached to something practical. Okay, because the neuroscience by itself is not enough, believe it or not. It will certainly massively improve the team, but then you need to land it in a sort of concrete, practical way, more than the sort of tips that I've just given. So psychological safety, SCARF will create more psychological safety. Happy days, job done. Dependability, I'd scribble this down. Team members get things done on time and meet Google's high bar for excellence. That means I trust the person to my right-hand side. You see that in the military. You see that in the ambulance service. You'll see it in organizations like, co-located teams. You'll see that everywhere. So in a virtual team, being able to trust other members to get stuff done of a certain quality is really important. Structure and clarity, we've talked about last week. Same thing, it adds certainty. It's a source of great anger and frustration when somebody feels that somebody else is doing part of their role. Meaning we talked about last week, but the last one I do want to talk about, and that's impact. Team members think their work matters and creates change. Neuroscience is great, but then when I do the doing, it makes a difference. Okay, that's all I wanted to say, nothing more than that. Land it in a really practical way, and then you're on really good footing. Now, I always say interventions to help your virtual team thrive. The first one is, I've broken this down into the SCARF model, and it's a kind of summary of some of the things we've talked about. Draw on other people's areas of expertise to solve challenges, or draw on other people's areas of expertise to upskill other team members. That's a great way of improving somebody's sense of status. Certainty. What goal can you co-create today to give your team a clearer sense of purpose? Co-create being the critical word. All right, and then we've got a co-created sense of certainty. Now, these interventions, just to remind you, please only do one. If you try and do all 5, you're not going to do a great job. Just do 1 per week. Autonomy. What task can you give others to do to reduce your workload and create more autonomy? I am massively under the pump at the minute. If I feel I can give something to one of the team who will just run with it, I'll do that. It's good for you, it's good for the team member. So it's a classic win-win. 4, relatedness. Create a daily catch-up at lunchtime. There's some kind of simple hangout. Call it laughter over lunch. Call it whatever the heck you want. It's similar to the coffee catch-up I mentioned last week. It's really about ensuring that you're spending as much time on the social glue as you are on the outcomes. And then finally, fairness, be 100% transparent about any tough decisions you have to make. Now, we may have already gone past that point for a lot of you, but I think that right now, if there are tough decisions that you've had to make, then the more transparent about the why and the how, the better. You may not agree with it, but at least then what they're getting is a sense that you'll always be open and honest. You're not hiding stuff. So that's it for this week. We've covered a lot. So just to repeat, our brains are geared towards reward and survival. More towards survival than reward. We are triggered, socially in the same way we are physically. We respond in a very similar fashion. The reward response and the pain response. As a consequence of that, when you look at the SCARF model, your job in the SCARF model is move towards the green and move away from the red. That's it. SCARF model, move towards the green. The tips in the SCARF model are helping you to move towards the green. Finally, in Aristotle, how do we, once we've got psychological safety starting to happen because of the SCARF model, what else do we need to do to make this land in a good way? It's about impact, it's about roles and responsibilities and so on. So that's it on team, the neuroscience of team, to help you have a great team, particularly in this virtual world. I'll open it to questions. I think what I'll do this week, because I'm conscious we're about 6 minutes left. Happy to go beyond that, but I know that people have to duck back out and go to back to work. But I'll probably chop the question and answer piece off the back end of the recording, because I think some of the questions can be a bit personal, and I'm conscious about people's privacy enormously. So if you have any questions, by all means, type them into either the questions box or the chat box. I'll just give that a second or so. I think we've got some people here who know their onions as well, which is great. And I'm happy to unmute people if needs be. So if there's any questions, fire away. I'll just give that a few seconds. I think one of the things for me when I was really learning about this stuff, and then you start connecting all of the dots, is you realize that most of the organizational cultures that we work in, because they're very unconscious about this science, they're operating in a way that's not healthy at all. And again, it's because our natural tendency is towards survival. And so people build structures around themselves to feel safe. And I used to see that a lot in the bank. So I'll build my team of people, my power structure, my connections, and all of that kind of stuff. Just bear with me a second. Okay. Just go to participants. Right. Just bear with me a second. Rod, did you want to ask a question? Because I'm happy to unmute you. Just unmuted you. You okay there, Rod? You're permitted to talk, apparently, if you want to. While you're thinking about that, Rod, I'm just going to answer. What tricks do you know, if any, to introduce or increase mutual accountability in a team? That's a bloody good question, Phil. The simple answer to that is what I've used is what I talked about last week, which is the design team alliance. What are our behaviors? And also an exercise that brings their unconscious values and makes them conscious. And when I've done that, even with very diverse groups of people, who think they're all different, they're shocked to find that they all agree around 4 values, often just 4. What that then means is there's this, because we co-created our behaviors, and the behaviors are a physical expression of our values, then it means that the team starts to police the accountability. I can't think of a better word than police. And then your workload reduces enormously. So we've agreed to now the important thing is once you've got those values agreed and those behaviors agreed, you constantly reinforce them every catch up. Not in a heavy-handed way, but I just want to commend Mary for saying X to the customer yesterday. We said in our values we'd be open and honest. Mary was open and honest. The customer really appreciated it. Just want to say thanks a million. That was absolutely brilliant. Well done, and so on. So that is a simple way of ensuring that they become a constant part of your conversation. So if they're not co-created, you will not get mutual accountability. And without those foundations, it's always going to be hard work. Okay, right. I am going to ask, is there any other questions? Yeah, I'll give it a couple of seconds. Right, last thing from me. If you found this of massive value, if you found it of value because you got one thing from it, then I'm delighted. All I'd ask is we're going to run again next week. Please share this with any of your colleagues who would think it's of value. Now, next week, we are going to talk about, he says, looking around, capable context. And what I mean by that is that, so individuals sit within the context of teams. Teams sit within the context of organizations. And what I'm going to go into detail is social physics. And I'm going to talk about what a healthy organizational context looks like. I'm going to give you a simple score so you can score your own context to see how healthy or not it is. Hopefully that'll be healthy. And then a couple of action items at the end of it as well. It's kind of making the invisible visible again. People talk about culture, the way that we do things around here. It's not that. Culture is not the way we do things because often it's invisible. So my job next week is to show you how we make the invisible visible. Okay, question from Phil. Invited colleagues that missed the last session, are they able to receive a link to the module? What we'll do, Phil, is I'm going to try and do the editing of this afternoon because I'm not working Friday and Monday. I will try through Rod and Ryan to get an email out to everyone saying, here's this week's recording, and we'll make sure that we add last week's recording to it too. Okay, and then we've got week 1 and week 2. and that should cover everybody. Has anyone got any last questions before we call it a day and we all head back to our daily work? And thanks for the question, Phil. Mike, thanks for the feedback. Okay, so just again, in the spirit of transparency, the first webinar, we had about 80 plus people that showed up, which was extraordinary because I only put up about 3 LinkedIn posts. This one, we had over 40 people had come along, which again is phenomenal because what tends to happen is it's the recordings that get watched. Not many people can make the live event. Our goal really, as I said, is to get this word out to as many people as always, to make life a little easier for you, to have more engaged teams, to do things that are simple yet effective. And, you know, so that people enjoy their work and experience a degree less stress. And you guys as leaders have a higher level of engagement, so you're not having to work so blinking hard every week. So that's really the outcome. So please share any links to any of the videos that I've put up. We're all changing the world in our own way, and as a group, anything that you add, any tips that you put in here, any feedback that I get, I take on board, and I'll share with the wider group as well. So on that positive note, thank you as always for the feedback. Let me know what else I can help you with next week. If there's anything specific around context that you're wrestling with, drop me an email, alan.furlong@radtac.com, or email Ryan and Rod, who you receiving emails from. We'll collate that. So anything about context that's driving your bananas, let me know and we'll address that. Otherwise, have a wonderful Easter for those of you who celebrate Easter. And I will see you next Thursday, same time, 12:30, for some more lockdown learning, all right? So take care. I will speak to you all soon. You're very welcome, Phil. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, David. Yeah, God bless you all. Thanks a million, Mike. Cheers, Ben. You're a diamond. You have fun, all right? Have a fun Easter, hopefully, and I'll speak to you soon, okay? Take care, all.